Welcome to Neuronoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast, featuring tech legend Jake Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The Neuronoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Morning.
Morning.
Let me get myself in the picture. There we go.
Hello,
how are you
hello.
this fine morning?
Let me get my picture on here. Well, doing fine. My co-host is on my lap sleeping here, so I hope that lasts for the hour.
Hey, Ruth.
Hello.
Nice to see you all, and I'm so delighted to get to share the screen with you, Jay Gunkelman, because I watched the movie about you, I've heard you speak, and I've never been this close. So
I have to apologize already? I'm happy to meet you more face to face, even though it's kind of the artificial Zoom
Just an
image.
illusion.
It's not quite like being able to give a high five or something, you know. So
right.
Ruth, welcome back.
Delighted when you put in the email that I was your buddy. I thought, oh wow, you called me your buddy.
You're back. We're all buds here. The inner circle of neuroscience. The ringleader.
brainwave buddy here. So, well, I think actually the documentary did 36 hours of video and then put it down into 2 hours. And
Wow.
I was pleased with the outcome. When editors could make me look like the class clown or the hero. I mean, and you never know. 36 hours they could have. They have a reel of men crying. That they didn't. All that's edited out. So they could have edited it up in a way that had a totally different story.
Well, now you have us curious. What got you all crying?
Well, I think they were talking about me passing, and that section of it is not my favorite part.
Really?
Well, it's
Tell us more. Sorry, I'm in an impy mood this morning.
It didn't have as morbid a feel as it could have had. But the irony, I think, is that Joe Castellano talked about the possibility of me passing, and that we all have a little bit of time that we know, and then poof, he's gone. So it emphasizes how ephemeral all of this really is. So
take care of your brain, take care of your real life relationships while we're all here.
Yeah. So Ruth and Mari, are you guys going to make Jay and I uncomfortable again?
I hope so.
Yeah.
All jokes.
Good luck.
All jokes aside, I'm really, really happy that you're. I don't want to say brave enough. That's patronizing, but that people are broaching this subject. I mean, we need to talk about it more. There's a new AI dating sites now. I mean, it's just. And males are far, far more susceptible to being drawn in. But what are those little duck decoys? It's the mallards that go to it, not the male ducks, not the female ducks. And we're really, really losing our young men. It's an issue of all ages, but I'm very, very concerned about younger males. Maybe you want to talk about sexual development in terms of brain. It's not a hormonal thing per se, but, maybe you want to yip a little bit about that. But, once the brain is wired to be satisfied by essentially false interactions, non-human interactions. There's no chance for pair bonding. There's no chance for, I mean, I talked last time about what I call juvenile erectile dysfunction. Who the heck ever thought we'd have an issue with that? 19-year-old males with ED? Come on, Tad.
Yeah. And also all the dysregulations of trauma and attachment trauma.
Yeah.
Your body is not working the way it's supposed to. And that, what I feel really concerned about, this big number of like Me Too abuse, mistreatment of people, because I think the dysregulation causes loss of control, and between the lack of information and the loss of control and what you're describing, which is this overstimulation, you've got these men, these young men, and then they grow up into older men and they don't know what they're doing, or they aren't controlling themselves. It really concerns me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to jump in there because we have a bit of a polarized situation here. Naomi Wolf wrote about this years and years ago, when we had the pornographic cinemas coming out and, all males were going to be turning into these extreme predators. It actually had the opposite effect. Okay. Essentially, turning people into masturbatory eunuchs, so no natural pursuit. And then, of course, we have the absolute opposite extreme, which what's going on in terms of the type of porn we have now. There's no such thing as soft porn anymore. And, what young males, when they're first exposed to this type of pornography, their assumptions of what potential partners and what intimate relationships should be is aggressive, if not downright hurtful, and not just predatory, harmful. So, how do we, and then you get sex ed in the school where, you just have a bunch of awkward people talking about ovaries and penises and things like this, So where do youth get correct information from? Where can youth healthily explore sexuality? Parents should have an ick factor, thinking about their kids' sexuality. That's natural. But on the other hand, you want your children to develop into healthy sexual individuals. We've got a void out there. And then you have two middle-aged women yapping online about this.
And you add to that attachment trauma, which is people not being able to tolerate real intimacy.
Yeah.
And it's like a perfect storm. One thing that's also been really interesting historically and troubling is that the kind of sex education that's available in schools very, very much correlates to what kind of government we have at a given time. And if you look at the history of governments and sex education, it's very interesting. Because we get one government that is very conservative, and they want, abstinence only, sex after marriage, so you don't learn anything. And then you've got someone, who's more liberal in the White House, like Obama, and so then you've got another kind of sex education in the schools, and it really varies according to the political.
Children don't change. Children are a constant. So we're really dealing with, confused individuals. I mean, I always talk about the healthy middle. Why do we as a society have so much trouble finding the healthy middle? I mean, we all know an extremely conservative society, abstinence does not work. We are sexual beings. In fact, pushing abstinence can be extremely harmful. If you look at well, there are many expressions, and all of us who are therapists know the more restrictive the culture, the more deviant the deviance. So you have to be really careful about that factor. But also, when you look at religious cultures are the absolute obvious, when you really, really make any thought or sexual process a sin, boy, oh boy, do you get unhappy people and extreme deviance, even pedophilia. So yeah, if anybody listening out here, find that middle.
Yeah, and I think part of what I'm really very adamant about is teaching certainly therapists, parents, everyone to be more willing to talk candidly about sex.
Yeah.
Because no one talks about it. It's still so taboo.
Mm-hmm.
So doctors don't talk to their patients. Psychiatrists don't say, you take Prozac and it's going to knock out your,
Yeah.
chemotherapy, high blood pressure medication,
Yeah.
surgeries, all these things. People are not warned about what's going to happen to them sexually, so it doesn't get talked about. So people think they're not supposed to ask. They think they're supposed to know, so they do what they think of as research, which is they go on the internet where you can find anything and everything under the sun, and there's no one's talking explicitly, candidly, and really informatively about sex. So we're titillated everywhere we turn, but there's no information. So people are, very stimulated and don't have any sort of good understanding of what are we supposed to do with this energy, especially young boys.
Yeah. Well, the good news is I do. And I think the more we talk about it on these public forums, I think therapists are really coming to realize that this is part of what they need to do. But Ruth, thank you so much for bringing up the meds. I mean, I think it's absolutely absurd. And maybe we're going to be able to push Jay's button here. Wind him up, wind him up, wind him up. But no, in terms of the sexual side effects, you have a depressed female, so you give her a very specific med that takes away her libido and makes her fat. Oh, that's really going to take care of depression. Same thing, classic time to prescribe meds or certain antidepressants tend to be during andropause and perimenopause. Okay, these are times where sexuality is changing, right, for both males and females. So you have a naturally aging male who's dealing with naturally aging parts of his anatomy, penis included, and penile functionality or sexual functionality. And then you throw it on a med that just literally and figuratively makes everything collapse. Why don't psychiatrists, psychologists really chat about the positives and the negatives? We talk about everything else, in all of our consent forms, risk benefit analysis. We go over all of this except sexual function. Why, folks? Why?
Absolutely. And even couples therapists. Mm-hmm. I have people coming in for couples therapy that have been in couples therapy several times before, and no one ever talked about sex to them. So as a sex therapist,
that has to be the third question, if not the first question in couples therapy.
They don't talk about it because they think, oh, well, if you're not talking about it, I guess I'm not supposed to, or else it's natural, so we're supposed to just know. And so people have all the misconceptions about sex. And I'm so amazed. People don't know this. I see so many couples, long-term monogamous, if you will, couples who haven't had sex with each other or anybody else in years. And I've had many men who are in their 50s, usually men who at a certain point, they kind of hit the wall in their early 50s because they're afraid their window's going to close and their whole life's going to pass by without having had a satisfying sexual relationship, and they've been married for 20 years, and now they want to get sex going with their partner. Nobody's talked about it all that time. I think that's magic. It's so lonely for people too.
Yeah. Another one that we often don't talk about, I think, maybe today we'll seed a lot of issues, and maybe, I don't know, Pete and Jay in a future show, pick a few to go in detail. But another one, we have a lot of sexual stereotypes in terms of females using sex as a power dynamic in relationships, and individuals who do get into the important aspect of pairs, pair bonding, and power relationships in pairs. Males play this, I don't want to say game, but for lack of a better word, sexual power dynamics are very much wielded by males as well.
I didn't know we had any power.
No, what I'm getting at, okay, maybe I should be a little bit more direct, is in terms of sex refusal. Yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it, is sex refusal. We have this stereotype that females are refusing or not in the mood, getting headaches, et cetera, or restricting sex as a power move, that I'll do this if you do that, or I won't have sex with you unless you do this or that, whether it's behavioral or attitudinal or what have you. But I would say it's pretty much well even. Ruth, would you agree with that? Yeah. And it's one of the hugest stereotypes that remains, that females wield this. It's equal.
It's not good for our population. Culturally, is there any comparison to like Japan? It's an aging population, and United States, we're having less kids. Do you see any?
Well, I'm going to jump, and I'm really not worried about the world population. Okay, we need to have fewer children, but in terms of for those of us that are here, whether we choose to have children or not, you want healthy relationships with the people that you bond with, and I can go on and on about Japan. I mean, Japan was one of the first countries to fall in terms of young males and pornography and prostitution. Of all the different, whether it's the massage parlors or the soap parlors, or all these very, very almost like childlike expressions of sexuality, and
Robots.
Yeah, all the robots, and the mini wives in the containers. And these young males marry them, and they're satisfied by them, and they feel they're much, much better than real women, because real women are so much more complicated. If I can swear, no shit. Human beings are.
So does it start with the schools? Because education has to come in somewhere, and as Ruth said, depending on the politics of it, but
it starts with bringing down the freaking taboo, right? And I think it became an issue of the schools because it was a taboo, and we didn't want all those teenage pregnancies and all of that. But I think this belongs in the family. And then if you're not dealing with it well in the family, I think the school should be a backup. Ruth, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that in very, very early in the family, and some of it has to do with how disconnected people are in families, that they talk about things and they don't really connect with each other, right from the beginning. So we've got all these attachment disorders and attachment trauma, and then they get a little older and there's no information in the schools, and there's probably exposure in the locker room and the dirty jokes, and then they start discovering porn. So whatever little bit of exposure they start to get very often is in the wrong places. And Meanwhile, their bodies are starting to secrete all these wild hormones that they don't know what to do with the energy. And so you've got a lot of problems developing at the same time. So I think the parents don't, so many parents don't say much of anything to kids about sex. And I don't know about you, but when you ask clients if anyone ever talked to them about sex when they were growing up in their families, certainly no one ever talked to me. And most kids, now there's a little bit more sort of liberalism, certainly in some areas, but most places really not. And there's once again this sort of swinging of the political tides and depending on religion. But I think the confluence between your body starting to develop all these energies, the lack of information, the overstimulation, and then what the kids are taught in school is basically how babies are made.
Yeah. Another thing I want to bring up is that
school stuff is all two-dimensional sex ed. The little line drawings and no perspective and no real deep discussion. And it is basically just the biology, functional, but no relational discussion. And all of this actually has a rising tide underneath it. And that rising tide is basically increased estrogen in the environment, so that young girls are maturing at a much younger age than they had historically. And the 1950s testosterone normal levels that used to be lab normals aren't normal anymore. The testosterone level and the level of sperm production has dropped precipitously in males. So there's biological shifts that are probably environmental, hormonal, chemical. That's interacting with all of this social stuff that we're discussing. And it's not a healthy change. Quite unfortunately, there's quite a few cancers, for instance, that respond aggressively to hormones. Neuroendocrine and obviously breast cancer and so forth. So the shifting in hormones that underlying all of the discussion we have about our relational interactions also are shifting our underlying health conditions as well. And it's you can't get an AI partner for your cancer, so these are not healthy changes. And I have to say we've had a disproportionate amount of discussion from the females in the group, and I'm not doing a terribly good job of balancing it out. I'm talking background chemistry and things like that rather than relations.
That's part of it. So go on. Yeah.
Well, to a certain extent, I'm not a great person to discuss relational stuff. I've got too many exes, So, although other than one who's died, the rest of them aren't particularly upset with me. So I guess that's about as good as I can say. And my current partner and I are together 18 years and happy with that. So I guess it isn't a total disaster relationally, but I do have a wake effect behind me. So I'm not the one to ask for advice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking about a few different things. I mean, we're talking about sex, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about pair bonding, we're talking about relationships, and Ruth has brought in attachment as well. I mean, all of these things are weaved together, but they can also be rather independent. Yeah.
I want to add more in neurofeedback because I'm curious about, those of you who have experience working with neurofeedback with any kind of sexual difficulties. I don't have a lot, but I have, because I was thinking about this couple that I was seeing some years ago, and they, she complained, or he complained about her having low desire, and she didn't feel enough desire herself, and also he was very, very interested in feet. So he was very kind of preoccupied with her feet, which didn't necessarily turn her on as much as it turned him on. But anyway, we reached a certain point in the couples work where it seemed like we were sort of hovering at kind of an impasse or slow progress. So I started doing neurofeedback with them, which was really interesting. We just started taking their session. I do 90-minute sessions with couples, and I split it in half, and we use we split it in three. We'd use 1/3 to do neurofeedback with him, 1/3 with her, and then we'd use the other 30 minutes for, therapy. And interestingly, it really brought up her desire level. And I just worked with, somebody suggested just PZ. And so I worked with PZ and kind of raising her numbers in that area. And I'm curious about any experience that you might have or that you might suggest, Ray, about neurofeedback for different kinds of sexual dysregulations or low desire or too much desire. What experience or just thoughts you have about that? Because I'm always interested in that.
Yeah, to the extent that you're working at PZ, you're probably helping their default mode network wind them their arousal. Well, arousal can mean a lot of different things when we're talking about sex here as well. So their central nervous system activation level down so that they can actually get in themselves at a feeling level. So that's probably extremely helpful. The anterior cingulate ends up being present in obsessive features, but it's also present in anhedonia, the same spot. When it's working, it gives you cognitive and emotional flexibility. When it's not working, you can be locked on, like an obsessive compulsive lock, or you can be locked off, amotivation, lack of initiation, anhedonia. Akinetic mutism is the logical extreme. So the anterior cingulate, for those that have an obsessive dysfunction in their relationship, you can count on the frontal midline as being a piece of the fix for them. And the difficulty is that it has three failure modes. In psychiatry, there's one kind of OCD, but there's three kinds neurophysiologically. You can have alpha, you can have theta or slow, or you can have beta. If it's not working right, you lose the flexibility. It cannot work right, whether it's alpha or theta or beta. It's not working in its normal flexible way, so you don't have the anterior cingulate's normal function. The further forward you go on the anterior cingulate and start to tuck underneath the subgenual aspect of it, that's the affective anterior cingulate, rostral and subgenual. The cognitive obsessive compulsive is a little bit further back, right underneath FZ. If you want to get to the affective division, you have to go a little further forward, AFZ, to get off of just the cognitive division into the affective division. But the EEG will guide you on that. You can see the distribution of the content and whether it's more rostral or more just at FC. And we've actually had very good success breaking up somebody's obsessive compulsive problem, whether it's locked onto drugs or other things. I mean, the cingulate is quite creatively flexible. If you say no, you can't be locked onto drugs. Oh, okay. Well, there's sex. There's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The cingulate is absolutely flexible. If you take one away, it's got lots of fallback positions, and you get symptom substitution.
Yep.
So unless you fix the problem, it'll just change the game on you. And you've got to fix the problem. It's also an obsessive lock on things that can be problematic. If your anterior cingulate locks on to suicidality, self-injury, things like that, you can end up having problems from that. And if you don't fix the anterior cingulate, it's right under the surface as a compulsion. So the anterior midline is important for all of this normal function, but your work at the back of the head dropped the arousal, the central nervous system activation levels to keep the discussion a little bit more clear on what arousal might be. Mm-hmm. The decreased activation of the central nervous system allowed the arousal to occur, and that's an important observation. The higher the pressure, the less the nervous system can calm down. So you've got to balance things to end up having the right situation.
Yeah. If I could jump in here, Jay, I think you're onto something that I just want to put into the couple scenario or the individual. I mean, I don't want to just stay within a conservative notion here. But what is the reason for the sex drive and the difference in the sex drive? So if we're talking about the occipital reason, there are individuals who have a higher libido because they're into their partner, and there are individuals with a higher libido because this is the way they calm and quiet themselves. So sexual activity, it's more than just a drive with the partner. Now, you have to be a little bit careful if somebody is in a couples therapy for this, because boy, oh boy, if you want to open Pandora's box in terms of like, why do you want me? Mm-hmm. But if you're an individual therapy, this is somewhere you can really go. What part of the brain is driving your sexuality? Is there really healthy? Again, we're going to play with arousal. The over arousal in the back of the brain has a positive genital arousal, or whether the over arousal in the back of the brain has so much arousal that you need a genital release, right? So really, really fascinating things when we get there. But it can also have the opposite effect. Excuse me. When people are really, really hyper aroused in the back of the brain, that can be an anxiety feature that can turn a few things off. So it's so delicate. So you have to get to know your client. But if I were just to put all this in a box in terms of the neural components, Jay already mentioned the FP midline, but depression, frontal lobes, classic arousal, sexual arousal killer or desire killer, as well as back of the brain. Those are the 2 areas or 3 areas that I typically work on.
So what's the playbook to correct all this? Okay. Fix the porn addiction. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, but it starts younger than that.
Well, I think we have to deal with our cultural naivety. Okay, so Ruth was talking about some of the pretty standard stuff of, where children or young adolescents or older children, I would say, get exposed. She mentioned the locker room, things like this. But I think we're dealing with a mass cultural naivety. Children, little children, they're discovering the pornography at approximately 8 years old. Okay. You don't have to be a parent to be absolutely creeped out by this. If we talk about trauma, kids walking in on their parents in the act, so to speak, but, children getting that type of exposure, and depending on whether they discover it by themselves or whether a peer or an elder sibling is like, hey, come watch this, it's far, far, far too young for that type of exposure. So the kids get their exposure somewhere between 8 and 11. And then we take them into sex ed and show them stick figures and talk about gender. Whether you are in a female body or male, but we're just so political and naive. If we can take the politics out and take the naivety out, we can get somewhere. Oh boy, I'm on a rant today.
So when does a parent talk to their kid about sex? 7? Yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
Because I take it back to the very beginning and I look at attachment and regulation. Because the way a child learns to calm down after getting hyper aroused is through the attachment. And if there's disrupted, insufficient failure of attachment, that child is going to be sort of at sea trying to calm down their nervous system without help. So you get a dysregulated nervous system right from the very beginning. I mean, like in the cradle.
Yeah.
And then you add to that, and this is something that I just am so devastated by, the attachment style that correlates to neglect, which is insufficient attention to the infant, is the avoidant, which I hate that word. But and very often what the attachment research tells us is the mother is repelled by the child's body. She doesn't want to touch her child. So that child grows up not only dysregulated, but starting out feeling physically rejected. So you've got a dysregulated nervous system and this, what we call skin hunger, before they even have cognition, let alone autobiographical memory. And that's the foundation that all this other stuff that you're describing starts to kind of sedimentary rock layer upon layer. And so by the time they're 8 years old and they get to the locker room, you've already got, all kinds of dysregulation, as well as psychological confusion about attachment and touch going on. This poor little kid, you throw in the high incidence of sexual abuse among children, and we've got a big mess here.
I want to take it down a little bit of a level here, though, too, Ruth, which is, you talk about how, you were talking about mothers. I want to throw fathers in the loop here as well. But, when a child starts to discover their body, okay, so when a child is in the bathtub and playing with their genitals, and I'm not just talking about male children, female children, how does a parent respond? Okay. Do they say nothing? Okay. Do they say, oh, no, don't touch yourself? Do they say, oh, that's fine, but you should touch yourself when mommy isn't around? Okay. Like, how do they respond to that? or, you know, when they find a child rubbing themselves against a teddy bear. It's the same type of thing. How do you parent that? And there are all kinds of moments like this. Children are incredibly naive when they discover the nerve endings in their genitals, and they find them very, very early. It's not sexualized per se at that point. They just notice there's a different feeling. And there are all of these points, or all of these moments in childhood where I think parents can I guess at that point, desexualize emergent sexuality, make self-touch safe, and put appropriate boundaries against. I mean, one of the things that I coach is nothing wrong with it, just bathroom or bedroom, door closed. And, you know, this is between you and your body. And if it's between anybody else, let us know. Or if you're starting to feel like you want it between anybody else, let's talk.
Yeah, and Mari, that's such a good point, because the parents aren't educated.
Yeah.
So the parents get really worried. I mean, I have heard the most horrible trauma stories about when a child, I have one client who told me that when she was, 6, and she and her friend, who was also 6, were playing, kind of doctor kind of a game.
Yeah.
And walked in and completely terrorized them.
Yeah.
Because the mother was so, ignorant and also prejudiced about, same-sex touch, that there was, and she was traumatized by this interaction.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is so important, that we need to teach parents that genital play between same-age kids is completely natural. There's nothing terrible about it. And also what you're saying, touching oneself, it's fine, just don't do it in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Do it in front of other kids, or, so we have to teach parents so that they don't get alarmed about anything even remotely genital or erotic as being pathological or dangerous or dirty, or, whatever else, the misconceptions are. And so your point is really well taken about parents needing to know what is completely natural.
And the community. I mean, I go into this, I have a little vignette in my book, and just same that you were saying, absolute tragedy. 2 little kids exploring themselves, and then one family accused the other family of having a budding predator. I mean, and these were just absolutely naive, innocent children. I mean, it just got horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Police got involved, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, we joke about, playing doctor and all these type of things. I mean, if you put kids in certain environments, they're going to explore each other. And I know in yesteryear, we had this awareness, so they always made sure that they separated children, right? The other thing, we're so political these days, but a lot of first sexual experiences, I'm going to say in yesteryear, were same sex, not because people were gay or lesbian, but that's just kind of where it occurred. I'm going to project a little bit on the folks that you talked about, two little girls exploring themselves. They just is like, hey, this feels nice, just like brushing each other's hair. There's nothing, I would say, of gender orientation in those activities whatsoever. And I think that's
sensualized as opposed to sexualized.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When we teach too early, I would say, about gender and gender fluidity, et cetera, I think we really confuse kids. Confuse kids.
And I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's so much almost fadism about gender, and people sort of suddenly turning, into a they and describing, themselves as some, non-binary gender, mostly, at least in some cases, because it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And a lot of confusion, which is not to minimize how much and how real it can be, but I think certainly around here, there is, it's almost kind of a fad for kids to try on different identities. And
Well, I think we should probably, I don't know if people are game. I think if we should probably do a show on that. And Pete, I think we should call it "Okay, Cancel Us," because if we really want to talk about this, we really, really need to talk about it without political fear of attack. But Juth, you said fad. I would say we're absolutely confusing sexual identities with imposed cultural identities. There's a beautiful, a few people have done it. They talk about, okay, if I could be paid 25% more, if I could walk alone at night, and it goes on and on and on. It says, yeah, I want to be a man. No, actually, I am a man because I can demand that, so, we're completely crossing sexuality with cultural repression of females. Again, if I were a 14-year-old female and could choose to be a male, good God, the advantages you have, right? So let's not confound those things. Nothing to do with who you want to share your bed with.
I want to echo what you said about, doing a show, whatever we call it. I think that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, the sunlight is coming in on me here. So
I thought you were just starting to glow,
Yeah, the effects.
You're on a roll.
The sun beams off the building across, and it's
What I was saying, I want to echo what Mari said, because I have a personal vendetta that I want to really help therapists begin beautiful. Now we can see your beautifulness. I want to help therapists have the courage and the gumption to talk about sex.
Yeah.
Bring it up, to name it, to inquire, to ask, to be educated enough ourselves that we can educate. And so if we are willing to say this show is going to be about, blah, that we're beginning to model something. And in the neurofeedback community, I mean, because I talk about it, but nobody talks about it in the neurofeedback community, at least in my community. So if we
I don't know, the last Susan, we were talking, I was going on and on about menstruation and ovulation, like, all of these things that, we don't talk about. Yeah, I'm totally, let's do it.
Put it there in the world and, say the words out loud and masturbate and whatever it is, that therapists can start to kind of come out of their shame and say these words explicitly and model to clients that it's okay to say.
How do you really feel?
Am I upsetting the dog? Am I upsetting him, or is it?
Yeah. No, but I think thank everybody. I like how clearly we're talking and putting in a little bit of humor and some seriousness. I think it. I taught very, very briefly master's level at a local university, and I was just absolutely shocked at the naivety of what was not being talked about in terms of what you need to know to work with people. And, some of the practicum students, I was just astounded that, can't you see that, the client is just having so much fun with you, making you extremely awkward, just talking all about these paraphilias that I don't even think were true. They were just getting a kick out of freaking out the young practicum students. But I also think that the university sent them in horrendously unprepared. Is this taught at university? Surely not to the degree. I mean, I know that I didn't have anything at my MA or PhD level. I mean, there was, natural human sexuality. And then, of course, we talk about the paraphilias, but we don't talk about the natural stuff, the good stuff, the lovely variation. We just go from vanilla to paraphilia. There's a whole, again, tons of stuff in the middle.
Who determines what's paraphilia?
Bingo, yeah.
That's another question.
Well, it wasn't until very recently that the EEG databases actually separated male and female.
Yeah.
And the dramatic differences during the developmental trajectory between male and female are identifiable now. Mm-hmm. And the 45 and older dramatic difference between females having more gamma and beta and males going kind of electrocerebrally silent on the higher frequencies. Mm-hmm. So you can't combine the two into a unique database and expect that to be a reflection of reality. You have to have sex-specific norms. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if you've got lots of beta, gamma in females and not much in males, and you're a female and it shows you to be less than more than the norm, you're perfectly normal for the female norm. Yeah. But if you have the unique norm, you're running a bit high, and the male is running a bit low, when in fact, compared to the male norms, they would be perfectly within the range of normal. So it wasn't easy. It took twice as much time to collect twice as many norms. You can't cut a database in half and have it be a database. You have to double the size in order to end up with two separate norms. Yeah. So the Koreans were the first to do it. The Swiss Russian database added more individuals and separated male and female, and also see differences. So it wasn't some odd thing that only male and females are different in Korea. No. So
that is interesting.
Yeah.
But it's
bloody time.
It's crucial that it was done. Now, there's actually been the Koreans supported a study coming out of San Francisco on females transing to male identity, and they looked at their EEG to see whether they were more male-like in were they more like the male norms or more like the female norms as they did their trans. So until you have separate databases, how could that study even be conceived? So luckily the Koreans, it was my gut instinct, because if you look at the structure of male and female brains, they are different. Males have a larger left hemisphere. We all swell with pride. Oh, we got a bigger left hemisphere, But males have a spindly little corpus callosum, and the females have this well-developed cross-hemispheric connection. And we should have colossal envy. Yeah. It's crazy to think of those structurally very different brains as having the same set of norms. Now, there are male-like females, there are female-like males, but until we actually separated the databases, there wasn't really a way to show anybody being an outlier within their gender. So anyway, I'm happy to see the databases move forward, because the researchers are being required to study male and female. You can't develop a drug only studying it on males anymore. You have to actually look.
Time.
Yeah.
Bloody time.
But having separate norms for male and female allow us to study that in a scientific way. That if you're using a unique database, you lose the ability to actually study that appropriately.
Yeah. Well, what a beautiful spin on that. As you said, the unique database, unique development. We just everything to do with gender and sexuality. Yeah.
Can I say one thing before we run out of time? Because this is so great as far as I'm concerned, that if we are able to go forward with it, I think that having, Jay come in and really give us all this brain EEG science alongside the sort of current socio-political attachment, and even, I don't know if the tech permits for this, to have call in people asking questions could be really interesting. This is such wonderful material. I'm so delighted, and thank you so much for including me.
Ruth, it's our pleasure. It's our honor. This, we get a lot of views when you come on the show, when you and Murray go at it.
I'm not ranting by myself anymore. I have a partner in crime. Thank you, Ruth.
Dr. Ruth, how do we find out more about you?
About me?
Yeah. What's your website?
Called ruthcohnmft.com. I write a blog every week, and you can get on the list and get the blogs. And I can't believe it that for 2 years, I have not missed a week. I have about almost 200 blogs on the site on all different topics. So, and my orientation is attachment and trauma, and my special area is neglect. But I'm a sex therapist, and I'm a neurofeedback person, and I'm very interested in a lot of things. And I'm delighted to be your buddy and to be in your Neuronoodle community. So call on me anytime.
You're in the San Francisco area? There you go. Right. Okay.
Best place, but it's cold right now.
And if I could travel, I would stop by for a visit, but I'm not well enough to really. I leave the house once a year for a 3-day party for my birthday and an EEG meeting here in town. And other than that, I only leave the house to go to the pharmacy. So, and to a large extent, I just have stuff picked up by Renita, but I'm not well enough where I would stop by to say hello. It's nice to meet you face to face in 2D at least. So,
where do you live?
Sassoon City, right just outside the Bay Area. Fairfield is the closest town that people know about. Sassoon City is actually one of the 30 oldest communities in the United States. It was a little spot you could get grain from the Central Valley onto a ship, and so it was an early shipping a long time ago. So, but Sassoon means west wind. It's a native word, and means west wind. And if you're in Sassoon, you'll pretty much always have a wind coming from the west. So,
one more quick question for all of you.
Yes.
Do you like cheese?
Who doesn't like cheese?
I'm a home cheesemaker, and the way I know how to say thank you is with cheese. So, if you want some cheese, send me.
Excellent.
I very happily send you some cheese. All my cheeses are cultured with love.
Well, I'm an eater, and cheese is high on the list of things I eat. So that would be fabulous.
You can ask my wife. I'm a cutter of cheese. And she's
my address. All of you who like cheese, send me your postal address. I'll send you some homemade cheese. You haven't had until.
All right. We're down. Plus, if anybody has any questions, they can email Pete at neuronoodle.com. We can read them on the air. Next time we bring Dr. Ruth back on, we can answer them all. We always have people asking us questions, Ruth, so we'll be locked and loaded next time.
Well, Mari and I will keep ranting.
Dr. Ruth, Dr. Mari, Jay Gunkelman, XXXX. Another great podcast. XXXXX.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. The Neuronoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.